welcome to the School of Speech podcast, presented by SpeechTherapyPD.com. School of Speech is designed specifically for the school-based SLP to come together to discuss current topics, tackle difficult situations, and share our insights. Our goal is to bolster confidence, celebrate our triumphs, and foster a community dedicated to the excellence in the school setting. Everyone. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here today. I am Carolyn Dolby, and I am your SpeechTherapyPD.com podcast host for School of Speech. School of Speech is designed for the school-based clinician SLPs to come together. We're going to explore current trends, share insights, and really champion our expertise. Our goal is to bolster your confidence, celebrate our triumphs, and really foster a community dedicated to the excellence in the school setting. We have two guests today, Cassondra Wilson, an SLP, and Amy Duncan, a literacy specialist. They are going to be walking us through classroom-based supports for dyslexic learners. We hope today that you can add to your toolbox some strategies and supports to really bring back to your campuses for your caseload with students with dyslexia. So Cassondra and Amy will be defining dyslexia's key characteristics and its impact on academic performance, while navigating our exploration of effective and practical intervention techniques with an emphasis on collaboration. All right, I know we want to get started, but I'm sorry, we got some housekeeping. Here we go. Each of our episodes of School of Speech are 60 minutes and are offered for 0.1 ASHA CEUs. So I'm going to go through our disclosures. Cassondra Wilson is a paid employee of the Ohio State University, and she's also receiving an honorarium for her participation in this discussion. Amy has no financial disclosures. For non-financial disclosure, both Amy and Cassondra are both board members of the Central Ohio International Dyslexia Association branch. Okay, these are our experts right here. For me, I receive a salary as the district level specialized support clinician. I'm compensated also for graduate courses I teach at the University of Houston, and I'm a consultant to school districts across the nation, supporting their program development staff training. I also receive compensation from SpeechTherapyPD.com for hosting School of Speech, which is my dream come true. Non-financial, I'm a member of TISHA, which is the Texas Speech and Hearing Association. I'm part of their Feeding and Swallowing Task Force. I volunteer for Feeding Matters, and I also am an ASHA SIG member of both Special Interest Groups 13, Swallowing Disorders, 14, Cultural and Linguistic Diversity, and also School-Based Issues. All right, but you know what? Enough about me. I want you guys to get to know Cassondra and Amy. So let me tell you a little bit more. I'm going to start with you, Cassondra. I know you know this, but everybody else out there, she is a clinical assistant professor at Ohio State University. She currently teaches and provides clinical supervision to graduate students in OSU Speech, Language, and Hearing Clinic. But before joining the faculty at OSU, she worked as an SLP in the public schools and outpatient clinics, and her clinical expertise is school-aged language learning disabilities, dyslexia, universal design for learning, and also assistive technology. Okay, so we don't know what you don't do. Okay, good to know. Okay.
There's a few things there, just a few.
All right, Amy, you're up. Okay. Ooh, I should have asked you to pronounce that for me. Let's see if I do this right. Orton Gillingham. I'm not sure why I was thinking I was going to stumble on it. Okay, sorry, y'all. She is Orton Gillingham trained literacy specialist. We love that. And is currently working towards her doctorate in special education at the Ohio State University. Previously, she worked as an intervention specialist in public schools and spent years in the clinical setting working with students with dyslexia. This clinical setting allowed her the privilege of working with students for many years, taking them from early phonemic awareness to essay writing. Whoa, wow. Welcome, Cassondra. Welcome, Amy. How are you?
We're excited to be here and talk about something that we're both really passionate about, which is dyslexia and how we work with our dyslexic students. So we're very excited to get started.
I love this. I think, if you don't mind, I personally want to know your journey of how you both became dyslexia divas.
No, I feel like before we got on, we were doing the air clap that we're dyslexia divas. So hopefully that just sets the vibe for our talk today and our discussion. But do you want to start? Do you want me to start? You can go ahead. Okay. All right. I guess I'll start. So I am Cassondra Wilson. I have been a speech language pathologist for 13 years now. 7 of those, I have been more specialized in language learning disabilities. Mm-hmm. So how I got here is I took a chance when I moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and I took a position at the Howard School in Atlanta, Georgia, which is a small private school for children with language learning differences or learning differences in general. And that can be language, it could be dyslexia, it could be a couple different other things, but again, for children who learn differently. And that's where I first was exposed to working with clients and students with dyslexia. Their whole motto is that a different approach makes all the difference, right? So it was the first time in my career as an SLP that I was really challenged to think outside the box. How am I going to do therapy in a classroom? How am I going to work with kids who are at varying levels with varying challenges? And then what is my knowledge on dyslexia and how am I going to work with these students? How am I going to help them? Luckily, I had a ton of support in the administrative team as well as my colleagues. And it was a really great experience, which has spurred me to keep learning and continuing on working with kids with language learning differences. And I'm happy to say I'm still doing it. So even though I don't live in Atlanta anymore, I'm still on that track. And even at the collegiate level, I'm happy that I still get to work with clients that have dyslexia. Right, Amy?
Okay, I'm Amy Duncan, and my journey started as a mom, as many people start their journey with special education. But my oldest son, who's now 19, when he was 1, he was talking, and then by 2, he had stopped. And my undergrad is actually environmental biology. So this is my second go round. But by working with early intervention and actually working with my sister, who was a kindergarten teacher, I diligently worked on sound relationships with him with letters and sounds. And that kind of got me interested in just reading acquisition in general and how to teach that properly and the most effective way, I guess I should say. So he started talking again, but as we know that a lot of times those speech delays are indicative of something that pops up later. And so something kind of popped up later in the school system and we ended up pulling him out and I ended up homeschooling, which I thought I would never do because it just kind of wasn't done in the kind of more urban environment I grew up in. And by homeschooling, I learned even more about how to educate and how to differentiate with all of my children. And when we at some point moved and stopped homeschooling, a friend of mine who has dyslexic children recommended that she thought I would be a very good teacher in their literacy center. And so I kind of got started there and realized I needed my master's. In the master's program, they didn't teach teachers at the intervention specialists how to teach reading. And I had already had my Orton Gillingham training. And I said, we got to do something about this. So I decided to go and get my PhD so I could make an impact in the higher education setting.
Wow, that's phenomenal. I'm just going to put this in the back of our heads for just a second. Kelly, thanks for joining us. She is wanting to broaden knowledge and also specifically screenings, if we can tie that in. And I'm going to I've written that down that we can just maybe swing back around. But I think since this is such a fun episode that we should start with facts and myths. Take it away.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let's start there. So for today, we had a couple different ideas. We're throwing a few different ideas around. Do we just start off with the dyslexia basics, or could we make it more interactive, more fun, more engaging? Because again, this is a podcast and we actually have an audience. So why not engage the audience? So our first myth versus fact for the audience is, this is probably an easy one to get started with, but you can outgrow dyslexia. What are your guys' thoughts? Is it something that you can outgrow? What do you think?
So if you don't mind, listeners, just doing a yes or a no.
Throw it in the chat. Can you outgrow it or can you not? What do you think? No. Okay.
No, no.
Everybody agrees. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen.
We're just getting this going. So again, we knew that was an easy one. No, you cannot outgrow dyslexia. It persists through the lifespan. And again, annual monitoring of phonological skills is, very important. So again, not something you can outgrow. Okay, good. Glad we're all on the same page. Great test question to start us off. So our second one is going to be, again, myth versus fact. Accommodations are a crutch. Students who utilize them will become lazy. And my SLP is out here. Yeah, I know. I'm probably going to get a strong reaction. We hear this all the time with AAC, right? When we're thinking about our big devices that we're using with, various clients. But when we're specifically talking about dyslexia and using assistive technology to help children work around some of their challenges, it is not them being lazy. We're just giving them access to the material. We're not going to spend a lot of time today talking about assistive technology. I mean, we can, but we're going to be a little bit more focused. But I just wanted, again, to kind of bring us all together as SLPs. And again, the same thing reigns true here. It is completely a myth. It's not going to promote laziness. Kids want the path of least resistance. So, as soon as they're able to read and write, they're going to do those things. But again, we might need to utilize technology until they get there and they feel confident with that skill.
I love it. I'm sorry. I have to do a shout out to Adrienne Marsh because I loved her answer because she was like, ugh, no. Right. Okay. That was the great answer.
Amy's new to our SLP world. So again, we hear this all the time. So I figured I'd hit a couple chords, make sure everybody's before we really dive in. Okay, so dyslexia is caused by issues with eyesight, and colored overlays in Ireland lenses can help them read. That's a little bit trickier of a one, maybe a little bit more lengthier. I'll say it again. So dyslexia is caused by issues with eyesight, and yet colored overlays can really help. False. Myth. Okay, all right. We're all on the same page again. Did you want to talk about that one a little bit?
It's okay.
No, I think we're on the same. I think we all have the same knowledge here. So again, we really just wanted to test our knowledge here and bring us together as a group. Writing and reading. Oh, this is my next one. Writing and reading letters backwards is a main sign of dyslexia. Myth or fact? A little slower on this one, everybody, but that's okay. We're gonna talk about it. Yeah, let's talk about this one. This is why I thought I might stump some people.
Well, I think they're like, are you tricking us?
Yeah, right.
So all kids might reverse their letters and kind of put things like the B and the D, right? It's often very tricky for all students, and it's actually a sign that their instinctual neurology is just intact. So imagine, we call this a mirror generalization. So if you can imagine a lion facing to the right? And I would say, what is this a picture of? And you'd say, it's a lion. Now, what if the lion was facing to the left? What is it now? So your brain actually doesn't distinguish between, it automatically creates a mirror representation of things it's kind of a survival instinct, right? You can kind of think if a lion was approaching you, you want to be able to recognize it from multiple directions. And so it's a mirror generalization that is kind of a natural development. And we have to essentially help them unlearn that when it comes to letters representing sounds, because so many of them, the P's, the Q's, the B's, and the D's can trip them up.
Right. So, okay, moving on. Dyslexia is caused by insufficient and ineffective phonics instruction.
Dyslexia is caused by ineffective phonics.
Insufficient, ineffective phonics instruction is caused. I put a tricky word in there, but trying to trick you guys a little bit, but no. So again, additional phonics instruction may not significantly benefit a child with dyslexia, but children with dyslexia can acquire phonics skills once they possess foundational phonemic awareness abilities. So again, just thinking that through a little bit more. Okay. And then I think is that all the ones that we had? Yeah, that's pretty much sums it up for us, getting the, audience involved. But for a rote dyslexia profile, what are we looking for, right? In our students, what are the signs, right? In our students with dyslexia. So again, things that we look out for: difficulty with accurate and fluent word recognition. So fluency, reading fluency, we're checking that. And accuracy, We're looking at challenges in spelling, impact on reading comprehension, differences in phonological processing, struggles with recognizing and manipulating sounds and language, potential difficulties with other language skills like vocabulary and grammar. And again, this is not something that they can outgrow. And something that I think that we in the field, and somebody asked a question already about screening, but something that I think we can be doing better as SLPs is early identification and intervention. So we're going to keep talking about that throughout today's conversation. But again, the profile, when we're thinking about it, it hits those things.
So when you're talking about the profile, I think there was maybe like 8. I don't know if I got them all. Yeah. I just want to make sure, because this would be those key characteristics, right? Right. And and I'm sure you're going to get into this, like, is it more than one, or how many of them? When the first one,
it can be more than one. I think it impacts students differently. And I think that that's why, we have so many, we're getting off on a side tangent already.
Oh, sorry.
I think that that's why we have so many different reading programs. I think that that's why there's been so many things developed, is because not each kid presents the same way. There is not one size fits all approach. So I think that it's important to know that some children might have some of these certain aspects, but not necessarily all of them.
It's similar to other neurotypical kind of developmental disorders, where there is a spectrum, and it can look a certain way for a certain child at a particular age, but then it can look different as things get more complex. So there are some children who make it through to 3rd grade simply by almost memorizing words. And then when they hit more complex texts, then they start to decline in their academic success. And then there are students who struggle and they seem to be better, and they say, well, it looks like we've got them up to grade level. And then again, once things get more complex and they're expected to do more heavy essay writing, and that the language and vocabulary is just highly, the morphology piece for them just isn't intact. And then they try and take away supports, and then they start to fail. So there is, again, overlapping waves and a smattering of symptoms as it occurs with a lot of other developmental disorders.
Wow. Okay. I know we're SLPs here. Oh, and Amy.
And Amy.
And Amy.
Newly adopted.
Right? We're all saying, what is the SLP's role? Like, is that too big of an ask? Is that too big of an ask?
It's not too big of an ask. And I think I'm going to let Amy answer that one. No?
Okay. I'm just going to hit the background that made me this is one of the things that sparked my interest when I was in my master's program, that in doing research on my own, I came across an author, Usha Goswami, and she is a cognitive developmental neuroscientist. I don't know if I have those in the right order, but she is my academic crush. The papers she writes are actually very easy to read.
Yes.
And
Goswami, for those listening.
So here's something you need to know. So let's think about it for a second. Why are speech language pathologists have anything to do with written text? Right? Because your realm and role usually just encompasses oral language. So oral language, text-based literacy is absolutely built and based off of oral language, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So our oral language is based on this timing and rhythmic component, right? We're a stress-timed language, right? Now, let me give you 2 background pieces. The things with a student with dyslexia, there are 2 things you need to kind of understand. As the speech comes in, so even from infancy, we see differences here. Okay. From the time they are born, they see these differences. So as speech enters, right, the ears, that energy is perceived, and it's all based on the timing of that acoustic energy, right?
What we're hearing.
Like, think about like the rise times in the speech envelope.
Yeah.
So the amplitude of the rise time.
Going back to grad school.
Sorry,
I know, I'm going speech
way out of my scope.
But it's interesting. I promise we're going to title it, but yes.
So, but what they see is that they're unable to discriminate those rise times. So their actual perception of speech, they're unable to then create representations. And the reason why too is there's twofold, right? You have they're unable to discriminate these rise times in that energy coming in. What is supposed to happen as that energy comes in is that these energy fluctuations, and they're called oscillations, brain oscillations. And I kind of think about it as this wah, wah, wah.
Yeah,
like happening.
It's
like a normal, like it's kind of a normal steady state.
Right.
But as sensory information comes in, what is supposed to happen is the rhythmic like timing is supposed to entrain.
Yep.
It's supposed to sync up with that timing of energy that's coming in. And this is my understanding.
Right.
And what's happening is, so they're unable to discriminate the timing, and they're also unable to sync up with the timing that they're perceiving.
Yeah.
So they're kind of twofold here is what is my understanding. And so they're unable to really create these great representations of sound. And that rhythmic structure of sound is what cues the learner like to implicitly understand the code behind oral language, and then therefore the code that we see in written text. So it is an oral language kind of from the beginning deficit that comes in. It's a kind of a processing of that auditory, like that speech signal coming in, and the entrainment of the brain oscillations to that speech signal.
And it's like every time Amy talks, I'm listening to her, I'm like, whoa.
Well, when I heard that, I went, oh my gosh.
Oh, wow.
I am not as smart as this woman, but she is amazing.
But it's really fascinating to think about, like how we process language, how we process oral language, right, as a foundational skill for like learning to read. So again, I'm going to read a definition from ASHA.
Okay.
Yeah, I see that. But I'm going to read this definition from ASHA, and I want you guys to think about this for a second. So, a language disorder is impaired comprehension and or use of spoken, written, and or other symbol systems. The disorder may involve 1, and this is going to take you guys back to Bloom and Leahy. 1, the form of language, which is phonology, morphology, syntax. Then you've got 2, the content of language, semantics, and or 3, the function, right, of language. So in communication, pragmatics, any combination. That is from ASHA in 1993. So do you think we have a role within dyslexia? When we think of form, content, use, right? Content being, form being how we say something, content, what we say, use, why we say it. And then thinking about like the whole language learning disability, right, is impaired comprehension and or use of spoken, written, and other symbol systems. I think we can make the case that we need to be working with these students. Now, before everybody comes at me with pitchforks, I am not here to say that we need to be taking all of these students on. I think that our scope is so wide, and it sometimes feels like it's never ending. And I don't think we need to be taking on dyslexia as an like, I don't think that that's what we need to be doing, but I think we need to be considering, how do we work with our students who have these difficulties? What can we do to support them? Who do we find on our hallways? Who can we go find to help us work with these students, right? And I think that that's what led me to Amy, but we're going to talk a little bit more about our collaboration here in a second. But I think when we just go back to the definition from ASHA, it's pretty clear that we do have a role in it, right? And I think oftentimes, especially when I was first getting started with working with my students with dyslexia, I felt overwhelmed. Where do we even begin? What do we do? Like, how am I going to be working with this, student? And I think it goes back to 2 key things, which every SLP on this call is going to be like, oh, yeah. We're going to talk about assessment, and then we're going to roll into intervention, right? So back to basics. 2 key things. Do you want to, I saw that there might be some questions in the chat. Should we?
So where we are was, Slim was saying, love, Amy, your explanation really was stellar. But could one of you write in the chat the name of that author you were talking about? Because I did not capture it myself.
And I certainly don't want to,
we wrote it down because we thought that somebody might ask that. So we want to make sure.
I don't want to misrepresent her research in any way. This is just my understanding from what
absolutely. But as clinicians, so I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you, but as clinicians, we are always wanting to back up our work. We're always evidence-based. We're always wanting to show research that shows exactly what we're talking about. And that was it was fantastic. Let me grab this.
Well, I will say
perfect.
her papers, wow.
It's with an I. I spelled it with an E. My bad. It's I.
There you go.
Her papers are so well written. I think that they're just enjoyable. Of all the research papers that I have to read in this program, it's so fun to read her papers. I find what she's doing very fascinating.
I'm going to spell out the name for our, so those of us that are going to be just listening to this, the author is U-S-H-A. Last name is G-O-S-W-A-M-I. Just so everybody gets it. Because I think everybody listening is going to be like, I want to read that for sure.
It's just so interesting.
Yeah, it is.
I wanted to touch just quickly before you touch on assessments. Because I'm watching the time a little bit. So I'm a little bit frustrated, I guess, but I understand that we cover a lot as intervention specialists. We cover a lot, but so do SLPs. But that we are not really trained to perform assessments.
Okay.
The way that SLPs are perform kind of
the difference.
Small, like I don't, I guess because I worked with students with dyslexia, I don't particularly feel like I need a major formal assessment, but these students do in order to get identified as early as possible. And while I wish that was part of our role in our education, it isn't at this point in time. And because at the very beginning, we see the characteristics come out as oral language, kind of their ability to reproduce words with multiple syllables, like elephant or spaghetti or popsicle or things like that, where they are jumbling. It's typical to do it a little bit, but jumbling those if they're just not hearing sounds quite correctly or that speech delay, you'll see these signs come up, and that the speech pathologist is really well equipped to even just perform a quick PAST, like phonemic awareness assessment or something.
So wait, somebody actually, hold on.
Go ahead.
Let's talk about that for a second, because somebody asked about screening already. And I am going to segue into assessment here. So that's where we're going to start the conversation. So when I do that, when I'm thinking about assessment, the first step, what I might do is called the PAST. And I don't know if anybody on the chat has heard of the PAST before. Is anybody?
I have not, but jump on the chat. But I also have another question too before we get too far in. So, Sarah, so we've got,
so a few.
It's real quick, and I can do a PAST.
Right, the PAST. And so I would recommend looking at the PAST first as a screening measure, because one, especially if you're in the schools, one, it's free.
Okay, that was the question. Is it free? And are you saying PAST?
P-A-S-T.
It's okay. I'm awareness.
Yeah. The phonological awareness screening test. PAST. Yeah. So it's free. You can download it. Go check it out online. But teachers know about it. So that's why I would recommend it. Another really popular one is the Woodcock Reading Mastery Test, WRMT. But again, I would lean more towards the PAST in some instances, especially in the public school setting, just because one, it's free, it's easy to download, it's quick. It will give you a little bit of insight to go off of and find your psychologist and be like, what's going on? We need more answers. So it's a nice foundation for that kind of a conversation. And then you can find your other friends on your hallway and go talk to them about, hey, what is this onset rhyme? Or, oh, he's not blending these sounds together. Oh no, what should I do here? And so then you can go phone a friend and they can kind of help you get started. So again, it gives you a really nice basic baseline of where a child might be struggling. So I would tell you to look there first. No.
Is the PAST, is there an age range for the PAST, or is it?
Oh, yes. So there's a couple different forms. So there's an A, B, C, and a D form.
I think it just goes in sections.
It goes in sections
on the age.
Yes.
So the preschool, it is really just
preschool,
like a 5-minute thing.
Like it's really quick.
Heavy. You just have them do a couple words like, say popcorn, or something. So it's about they're hearing more phonological, like the larger components. Can they hear the break in the syllables? Can they repeat them back to you? Or do they kind of garble it, or do they leave a syllable off? Right. Those are the things they're looking for. And it's quick, and they don't get a couple and you're done. Right. So,
and I pulled it up. Dr. David Kilpatrick is who developed the assessment. So I don't know if anybody's familiar with him on the call. He's a phenomenal speaker if you ever get to go listen to him. But I really like this as a screening measure. And again, like, it's very quick. It gives you just a very good baseline of information. I don't see age ranges per se on here, but I believe that I've given it. Is it?
it is in there.
It's so tiny. Hold on. We're trying to blow it up.
I just did these screenings last
year. That's the biggest I can make it.
It says level, like
preschool, grade level, preschool through.
Right. So you can pick the section of the category you're in and see if they do it, or sometimes you start behind and just see how far they can get.
Yeah. Okay.
And then at the literacy center where I worked, the SLP there, she always conducted the CTOP as a screening.
Yes. And you can also
a screening measure because it counted working memory. And that's a pretty significant.
We're going to talk. We're going to talk about what Amy's mentioning in 1 second. Give me a minute, everyone. But okay, screening, free screening measure. I want to reiterate that, like, that's something that you can access tomorrow, right? That's a tool for your toolbox that you can download and use ASAP. And that you don't have to have a lot of like skill or practice yet to do. So if you want to get started, I would tell you to look at that and see how it can help you with some of the clients that are maybe struggling, or students that you see that are struggling. So start there. Any questions that came in as we were finishing that? I'm sorry.
Well, actually, there was one that I think I missed a little earlier when you were talking about neural alignment. What does it look like in young children? And if we can maybe start with the young children, what does that look like? And then we can jump back into where we're going next.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know exactly I don't understand the question all the way. What it looks like.
It's the lack of, like, how would it present? I'm sorry, I didn't even ask the question right. How would that inability to synchronize everything look in a young child?
Oh, so I think how it's coming out is and what you see is that kind of syllable, that mishearing of syllables and inability to kind of
blend or segment, maybe.
They might hear the syllables coming in, but not necessarily be able to repeat them back to you.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not 100% sure. I think what we really see from this, or what makes sense based on this, is that they're not able to encode, or they're not able to implicitly form a memory about what this word sounds like, and where timing happens within this word. And they're not able to gain this kind of statistical knowledge that happens with typical children to start forming these kind of ethereal, like, conceptions of how language is structured.
Okay.
So I can't tell you kind of what the neurological tests they do. That's way out of my realm. But I think it's an explanation for why they're not forming phonological representations appropriately, because they're not perceiving them properly, and they're not able to remember them, like form a concrete representation. Okay. That's my understanding.
The concrete representation.
Yeah, that's my understanding. So it kind of maybe makes sense why it takes them longer to learn, right? It's not that they can't learn, but it takes them longer to learn because they have to kind of really zero in and hear it, like, carefully and completely, and practice saying it and repeating it and things like that. So they just might need more exposure than the typical.
Okay.
So hopefully I answered that okay. Yeah. But again, this is quite out of my general scope, but interesting.
Yeah, nonetheless, very interesting. Yeah. All right, should I start talking about assessment? Because I know everybody's
let's jump right into assessment, because
really excited about talking about assessment. It really gets us jazzed on a Wednesday night. Talking about standardized assessments. But it's funny because I also teach diagnostics here at the university. So I spend a lot of time talking about assessment and tests for my day job. But I also really like to specifically talk about assessing our students who learn differently or have dyslexia. So when I'm assessing a student, I'm assessing for language and literacy. So what do I mean by that? I'm looking at phonological awareness, rapid naming, phonics, reading fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, spelling, written expression, reading ability. I'm looking at all of those pieces and how they come together. So can anybody think of any assessments that we give on a routine basis or that you've given recently that hit phonological awareness, rapid naming, phonics, reading fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, spelling, working memory. That's not I skipped that. Working memory, very important. Spelling, written expression, and then just maybe even general reading ability. Do any of our normal assessments do any of those things? Does anything come to mind for anyone? They might be waiting for me to go into it. So
okay. Why did you, yeah.
I'm just going to go in. So spoiler alert, there are assessments that we already give, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about the subtests specifically. So again, I'm not going to say anything groundbreaking here, but assessments that we in the States give often is the CTOP.
See, two people already said that. I was going to see if you were going to say that before.
Amy said it earlier, you guys. She gave you a hint. So the CTOP is one that we give often, and key subtests for the CTOP are phonological awareness, phonological memory, rapid symbolic naming, and alternate phonological awareness. I give the past, and I'm kind of thinking about this too in like little subcategories. So I'll give the CTOP specifically when I'm thinking about phonological processing. Okay. When I go to spoken language, I might switch gears and give the SELF 5, which
Kelly jumped in and said the SELF with a question mark. So Kelly, you're right.
The whole SELF 5 isn't going to give me the everything that I need, but it might give me some clues, right? And I know that that's an assessment that we have. Most schools have. So why not use what we have and try to pull some information out from those assessments? And then the CASTLE too, the TILS, which is another one. So CASTLE's comprehensive assessment of spoken language. And then the TILS is test of integrated language and literacy skills.
Clem threw that in there, TILS. I was wondering. So, but wait, what is the PATNU? PANTU? I'm not sure I'm familiar with that one.
Oh, the phonological assessment of I call that, I think, the patent in my own language.
I'm sorry.
It's one that I don't give often. But you can definitely take subtests from that assessment. I've given it before. I haven't had easy access to it, so it's not one that I give often. Like the school districts that I've worked in previously didn't have that one actually. So I wasn't able to give it, but there are definitely subtests from that assessment that will work here. But what you want to look for is, phonological. Yeah, thank you. Phonological awareness. Thank you. Somebody put that in the chat. Thank you. But again, I just like to think of assessments that maybe might get me things in a subcategory. So like written language is another area, right? When we're thinking about literacy. And what assessments do we already give that are looking at written language? So we've got, and I'm not going to say a complete list here, you guys, but just to get the, juices flowing here. We've got the test of word reading efficiency, which is the TOWRE, TOWRE. We have the Gray oral reading test. We've got the QRI, which is a personal favorite. And I don't know if anybody on here has ever given the qualitative reading inventory. It is not a standardized assessment, but it's a great assessment. And if you have never looked up the qualitative reading inventory, I think we're now on back in the day, I think we were on when I first learned about it, like the 6th edition. I think we're on 7 or 8 now of the QRI, but qualitative reading inventory. Go find that. It's an excellent assessment. It tests comprehension. It tests reading fluency. It tests look back strategies, comprehension strategies. I mean, it's a gem of an assessment. So go check that out. If I give you any other tools, that's one. So go look at that one. And it's cheap. So love a good. It's not free, but it's a good, cheap assessment that will give you a lot of information. Yeah, qualitative reading.
I just want to pop that in there. And then what about the OWLs?
The OWLs too. So I think, the OWLs sometimes gets a bad rap. Sorry, Amy. I know we're going in here. We're nerding out. I think the OWLs gets a little bit of a bad rap. It's going to give me more of an expressive and receptive language. And I've actually not given the secondary piece, which focuses on the written language, but it's definitely an assessment that does that. So if you have it in your repertoire of assessments, it's definitely one that I would tell you, go look at, see what it looks at, and then go from there. But the part that I give the most, or I've seen given the most here in the States, is the expressive and receptive side of that assessment. So I'm not as familiar with the written. The ones that I use the most are the test of integrated language and literacy, the TILS, which is a newer assessment. It's a really, really big box. So don't be overwhelmed when you see it, but it touches on so many things. Expressive receptive language, pragmatics. And it does a decent job at pragmatics, and it really involves the individual's perception of what's going on. So really like that part of that test.
And I'd like to jump in on that because, and again, this is another explanation for why kind of that, they call it the temporal sampling framework, why it makes sense that they're seeing this, is because the students with dyslexia often have issues with their pragmatics, and kind of sometimes social language is a little off with them, or their perception of it, because prosody is also based on kind of a timing feature as well. And so their perception of prosody can also be atypical because of that kind of that neurological basis that's happening.
And really quickly, for the sake of time, I don't want to get too lost in the weeds on assessment, but just to give you an idea of what I might, because I know the self is given, so I wanted to try to focus on ones that I know that people really have like a quick access to, that are really common. So like for the self, subtests that I might look at specifically, besides like the overall core language score, I might look at like the language content index. Well, and I also might look at the language structure index and how those scores come about, and then dissect it even further by like all those little subtests that go into those scores, right? So, but the language content and structure can kind of give you a decent idea. And then when I'm giving the CTOP, I'm looking at, the specifics here of, I said them earlier, but there's so many different subtests. I mean, I really do pay a lot of attention to the working memory side of the CTOP, because I feel like that tells me a lot about, is it sticking in their brain?
It does kind of indicate, it can be an indicator of how, I hesitate to say this, how quickly the student will respond to intervention.
Yeah, it can
like
be
even appropriate. So because if the working memory is typical, then I think, at least from what I've seen, if the working memory is in the typical area or high, then they're able to kind of encode those memories a little bit easier, and there's not as much repetition needed.
Right. Yeah. Last thing I'm going to say about this, if you are somebody who is like, oh my gosh, I still am feeling overwhelmed, just think about it this way. Take this, and you'll hear dyslexia people talking about the simple view of reading. And I have a great visual for that from the TILS. And I'm doing this because all of my graduate students are like, oh yeah, the box. But it really is a great visual representation. I took it from the TILS. So if you type in TILS simple view of reading, this visual might come up and there'll be 4 boxes. But I like to think of it this way in my brain, right? So if a student has dyslexia, they're going to be typically good language comprehenders and they'll exhibit poor word recognition.
So did you say TILS simple view of reading? I want to make sure
if you Google TILS simple view of reading, there's going to be a visual that comes up, and it's going to look like a graph, like a chart. And then you're going to have 4 boxes. And essentially what it is on one axis, oh, look at me going back to geometry.
So you said they're good language. Say again, do you mind? I'm sorry, because I got us off track for a second.
No, you're fine.
They're going to be good at what? And then say that one more time for me. I'm sorry.
I'll say the whole thing again. Don't even worry about it. So you're looking at the simple view of reading, right? So you've got on one axis, you've got word recognition. And then on another axis, you've got language comprehension, which is that oral language, right? Language comprehension, or just, language comprehension in general. Those are on what's on the axis, right? Again, this is a visual in my mind. I'm like, how can I bring this alive to a podcast? And I'm sitting here with my hands trying to do this, right? But when we think about individuals that have dyslexia, typically you're going to have an individual that has good language comprehension and poor word recognition. If they have a mixed decoding, maybe a comprehension type of deficit, they're going to have poor oral language comprehension and poor word recognition.
are you looking at, just as a question so that I understand?
So when I'm looking at a student and say they aren't performing well on an assessment, right? I'm looking for scores that are giving me more of an indication of how they're comprehending. And then also, can they identify words, right? How are they at identifying words? And if that individual is exhibiting difficulty with identifying words and maybe even reading fluency, I'm going to be thinking the alarm bells are going to be going off. Ooh, that looks like it might be dyslexia there. He's really, he can follow my directions, right? So a teacher might tell you, wow, he's really, great at sitting in the classroom. He's following the directions. Great. I give him a worksheet and he's just sitting there. Now there could be some executive functioning things going on, but I give him a worksheet and all of a sudden it's like, what we just talked about isn't happening. And that could be an indicator for me. It's like, oh, maybe that's a sign of we're comprehending the language piece, but yeah, it's just not coming out. That could be dyslexia. Now I also get, and I know everybody on this call has probably seen this if you're working in the schools, the students that maybe have more of the gray area, right, going on. So maybe a mixed decoding comprehension deficit, which would mean poor oral language comprehension with poor word recognition skills, okay? And what that looks like in the classroom is a student who is maybe just putting their head down, could be, right? Or maybe looking like they are completely off task. And it could be ADHD. There could be something, comorbidities. It could be something else, but, completely off task, not comprehending, just looks like they aren't even paying attention, not even doing anything in the classroom. It could be that maybe they have this type of mixed deficit.
And by that, are you referring kind of to the dyslexia versus a specific language impairment?
Yeah, I'm kind of segueing into SLI. Okay. Yeah. So in our role down here in the States, you'll hear that often. So I'm trying to kind of segue into that because, again, I think that's such an important piece of an assessment, right? You've done all this beautiful hard work. What do you do with it? Okay, what do these scores even mean? All right, he's poor here in, the receptive language task. Okay, so there's language, going on. All right, cool. But if that student's also maybe, word decoding, I mean, it could be, right? Like that mixed decoding comprehension deficit versus just being more of like that straight dyslexia type of profile that because we work with students with dyslexia, we're used to seeing.
But either way, in that scenario, you might then have the referral for not just the reading disability.
Right. You might have
intervention, and this might be where kind of we can segue into intervention.
Yeah. We're going to segue into intervention,
where we've got the intervention specialist working on the text base, and then the SLP working on the oral language comprehension, and then we can kind of talk about. I don't know.
I think let's again, I could probably talk about assessment all night. So we are going to actually table that. I think we've got some ideas of assessments that we can give, but what do we do with the information? How do we work together? How does that all come about, right? And I think that we both were like, they take nothing else away from our talk. What would we want them to take? And it's the importance of hallway conversations. And I know that's not groundbreaking. That's not going to be, groundbreaking to anybody on, listening, but it's the importance of leaving our speech caves. I don't know if anybody else calls that our speech closets. Down here in the States, we don't always have, great therapy spaces, right, in the schools. I think that might be a universal experience amongst all of us, but we don't always have access to great spaces. Neither do our intervention specialist members. So our friends.
So I remember in my head going, we're always kind of wondering like OTs over there, the intervention specialists over here, and the SLPs over here in another room. And what are they doing in there?
Yeah.
And so I wanted to give you an overview of kind of what a typical Orton-Gillingham / structured literacy kind of lesson would look like, so that you can see the overlap that happens between what is done for those students. And when I worked in the school, because the very first thing you typically do is you have the letters on a card deck and you hold them and they say, A says ah, B says B, and you run through that, right? And I found that you also often have a card deck. So there is a text element sometimes to your SLP sessions.
Think about articulation for a second, right?
That's the first thing.
And that's exactly where it comes in, because if what would happen is I would be correcting the students, and I wanted to make sure that if they're in speech, or if I need to help correct a student, especially ESL students who are having a hard time just acquiring producing certain new sounds, that I would pop my head in to the speech pathologist's office and say, hey, so how do you cue this? You know, like have them touch the tongue, touch their tongue right here, have them, you know, take a little straw. And so they would give me a quick, it was not a meeting. I was not asking for, you know, co-teaching in any way, because I know how strapped you are for time.
Yeah.
Like our caseload is like 16 and yours is like 80. So
here in Ohio,
I recognized how slammed she was, but I wanted to be sure that if she's doing articulation over here, that I'm cueing it the same way in my space as well. So, and that I'm doing it in an evidence-based way, and not just making up stuff.
Yeah, right.
Right. And so that's the first thing we do. And then we would say the sound and say ah, and the student would have to write down the letter A, the letter that represents that sound. So they would also have to kind of make that discrimination of like which sound is which. And they often have difficulty with short vowel sounds because they're very close in production, like in the production space when they're making it. So that's again something that's difficult. They can't discriminate those sounds. So they do a visual drill, they do an auditory drill, they learn like letter sound correspondence. I dictate a sentence to them, and they have to, in the letter sound correspondence, they would do spelling words that all have the same orthographic like pattern. Right. So OA words, we're going to do boat and float and moat and toast. And so I would hear things would come up for me where, what was it? The student, instead of saying star, was saying tar.
Yeah.
And was doing that on multiple words. Yeah. And I went, And so I walked down to the SLP room and I say, what's going on? Should they get an evaluation? Is this typical at this age? Because what will happen in the literacy, on the literacy end, is that they're gonna think the word tar and they're gonna spell the word TAR.
Right.
And so if we don't have these features kind of balanced between the oral and the text-based language, then it's going to come out wrong. They might not recognize it when they're trying to sound out the word star. They might not actually be able to put those sounds together to blend the word and read it.
Right.
So there are many overlapping components. They have to order, if I dictate a sentence, they have to remember and structure their sentence and sequence their words properly. Right, which is another kind of like you work on as well. Correct?
I mean, thinking, yes, definitely. And I think like, you know, even when I'm thinking like, you know, when I think about an Orin Gillingham like session, right, what she's doing in her space, kind of like how I can come in is thinking about like print concepts, right? So I'm switching gears a little bit, but I think it goes with like, how can we work together, right? And where can we overlap? And I think Amy just did a great job of talking about how like SLPs kind of can overlap over this way. But in our own world, when we get going on something, you know, what can we pull apart? So thinking about like print concepts specifically, like word attack skills, right? Phonetic decoding. We know a little bit about that. We also know a little bit about word recognition skills. Phonological awareness. We all know, I know it's an umbrella term, but we all know blending, segmenting sounds, rhyming. Those are all things that we can work on in our speech sessions, right? So when we're thinking of intervention, it's nothing groundbreaking. It's probably already things that you're doing, but maybe you didn't realize the impact that it was having on those students, specifically struggling readers, that could really benefit them. So again, like blending, segmenting sounds, rhyming. When we're reading a book, pointing out the pictures and the words. Like, again, it's not anything groundbreaking, but it's paying attention and really being intentional with what we're doing. And me running down the hallway to her saying, wait a minute, okay, hold on. Where's he at in the program? Like, you know, like what word level is he at? Like, how is he doing with, blending, 3 letters together? Right.
I think one of the things that we've talked about a lot is that if everyone's doing something different and the child is at 3 different levels in 3 different spaces,
right,
then how are we holding that child to a high expectation? Because we want to be sure that if he's already learned the SH sound with her, that it's in his card deck when they're working with me.
Right.
So, I need to honor what they've already learned. And if she's already taught him and cued him how to make the R sound properly, then I need to be forcing that, nope, try it again. right? And then cue and know the right cue.
It's that alignment.
Right.
Of our, aligning our practices, just being intentional with what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and talking with each other. And again, it's not like, when I worked at the Howard School, I had like a whole bunch of planning time, right? But that doesn't happen in the public schools. It's like running down the hallway and saying, hey, I've got this kid today, see you, like, you got 5 minutes after lunch, or something along those lines. And it's making it happen that way. It might be like, hey, I'm targeting vocab from so-and-so's class today. Ask her for the list. And it can be just something as quick and simple as that. And then boom, we're all working on the same vocabulary, right? Like the English teacher printed a vocab. I'm switching gears, like my middle school, high school clients, like, oh, hey, or students back in the day.
So if you're on an IEP, if you have a child's IEP in front of you and they have dyslexia and speech services, then just, this is what's in their card deck. These are the articulation sounds. And it can be, I know in the schools, everyone's running and they've got their phones and they just text. And it can be that fast. It can be that fast. Need to take a massive amount of time. We don't need to start having giant meetings about things, but it really can be just as simple as like text. And you don't necessarily have to do it. You can ask the intervention specialist to like just pop an update, a text update when they learn something new.
Right. Or like even, again, like going back, I pick on vocabulary often because it's easy, right? Like words are everywhere. We're always learning words. We're always looking at words. And I think that when I teach vocabulary, I might be looking at different tier levels of words, right? You might have heard that, like tier 2, tier 3, whatever. So I might be looking at some of those harder, complex words. I'm like, ooh, I wonder, is he able to decode that just yet? So then again, I might, shoot that over to her and say, hey, is this like word wise, like how does this look, like where he's at with you, like is this too complex, do I need to scale it down? Okay, maybe I can find some words that are at that like tier whatever level that he's at and make sure they're challenging but a little bit easier to decode, so I can also just kind of reinforce the print awareness, right? So again, nothing groundbreaking. I think sometimes too, as SLPs, we hear dyslexia and it's like, oh, whoa, we can't do that.
Enough to do.
Yeah, we have enough to do. And it's like an immediate shutdown, right? But the reality is we're already doing these things. Like it's really not anything new. And I don't think that we need to be obviously the literacy specialist. We don't need to take on that job. But I think that there's ways to help support and help think about like be intentional with what we're, presenting our students. And when we're working with them, just being really mindful of the word choices, being mindful of, hey, I did the past and I remember you really struggled with some phonological awareness skills. Maybe I'm going to start with a warm-up with some phonological awareness skills. And I'm going to do a whole group and it's going to be fun. Everybody can benefit, right? And then, that kid probably doesn't feel singled out. Everybody's having fun doing a rhyming activity. You're bringing some awareness to what has been happening in the intervention specialist room. And then you move on and you can continue on with your goals. But again, I don't think it always has to be so black and white. We don't always have to just, it's okay, dyslexia, I'm going to put on my literacy hat. This is what I'm doing. It doesn't always have to be that way. And I think that that's something I've learned throughout my years of working with clients and students and teachers and collaborating with others, is that I don't always have to know everything, that I can rely on my counterparts and phone a friend. Yeah. Like, again, I think that relationship is so huge. We're part of these IEP teams. Let's be a part of the IEP team, right? Right. And like get in there and high fives. We're cheesy over here, guys. Just accept it. But we're part of the IEP team. Let's be a part of it. Like, let's make our voices known, advocate for our students like we always do, and make sure that these things are being addressed. So, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Energy or what?
And it's 9 o'clock.
I love it. You brought it today.
I can't believe we've got the energy going today.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure that we've covered everything. I think we did great we've got the screening past PAST. That's a free tool.
Yeah.
I'm just shouting it out for those in the back. And then you've given us a lot of those assessments we're already doing that can also give us hey, there might be something else going on. Let's get them over to the interventionalists. And then getting into strategies.
Right. And I think really the strategy is phoning a friend. If you feel like you're stuck, finding somebody on your hallway that's doing a really good job and that is, doing all the things. Like, again, go find your literacy specialist. They're a wealth of knowledge if you feel like you're getting stuck getting started. And
I don't know, because you're based in Canada, correct?
No, Houston.
Oh,
I didn't know that.
yeah,
I don't know.
Just kidding.
Okay.
Just kidding.
So the professional development is coming.
Yeah. And I think that's another thing too. Yeah.
It is coming. But like I said, in my master's program, which was not that long ago, I knew how to teach literacy, but wasn't taught during that program. No one in that program was taught how to teach literacy to a student with dyslexia.
Right.
And so it's not always that you won't always be able to count on the intervention specialist.
You might have to, yeah.
It's coming, but it's part of just the higher education is starting to see, right? And the laws, many states are creating laws about it. And so it's coming, but you might have someone like me, and you'll see more of those soon, but
coming to a classroom near you.
Well, all right. I think when I worked in the schools 3 years ago, I think I was the only one who was trained. But since then, I think all of them got trained.
All of them got trained. Like I was one of 3 people trained in Orton Gillingham, and then everybody else got trained. So
it's coming. Yeah. But just
okay. So we're gonna get that support coming, you said.
Yeah. I definitely see a change and a shift nationally with this. And I think that, as the laws have again become more clear, more, bringing attention to dyslexia, I think we're going to get more funding and more support for more explicit training. I know that in the state of Ohio, we have a dyslexia support team. So they are, a task force. And, as we're rolling out screenings, as we're rolling out, what we're doing next, they are a huge support. So I think more states are doing that as they, do their own law, as they form their own laws and regulations on how we're working with our dyslexic students.
Yeah.
But I think nationally it's a conversation that is hopefully only gearing up, and you're going to be hearing more and more and more about this.
I love it. That means we're on the ground floor.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, I love it. Our time went by so fast today. I can't even believe it. Thank you, Cassondra. Thank you, Amy. You guys you've blown my mind. You guys are amazing. And thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us and coming on. I love the way that, first of all, the passion you have for these students, and just, you can tell that you love what you do. And I think that is infectious to all of us. So this has been so fun. I hate to say goodbye, but thank you, Cassondra. Thank you, Amy.
It's been great working with you. Thank you so much for having us.
Yes,
it's been such a fun conversation tonight.
I've loved it. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us on today's podcast. Remember to go to speechtherapypd.com to learn more about earning ASHA CEUs. We appreciate your positive reviews and support, and would love for you to write a quick review and subscribe. If you have indicated that you are part of the ASHA registry and entered both your ASHA number and a complete address in your account profile prior to the course completion, we will submit earned CEUs to ASHA. Please allow 1 to 2 months from the completion date for your CEUs to be reflected on your ASHA transcript. For our School of Speech listeners, we have a special coupon code to receive $20 off any annual subscription to speechtherapypd.com. Head over there to get ASHA CEUs for listening to this podcast and all other episodes. The code is SCHOOL20. That is SCHOOL20. Hope to see you on our next episode. Also, please don't hesitate to tell us which topics you would like us to cover in future episodes. To get in touch, drop us a line in the comment section or send us a message on social media.